The loudest scream is silence. Let that sit for a second, my friends, because today we're not here to talk. We're here to untalk, to pull back, to go quiet, and to let that silence say what words never could. You see, people think silence means weakness. They think if you're not shouting, you must be scared. If you're not chasing, you must have given up. That's the lie they want you to believe, because they can't control what they can't hear. But today, we flip that lie on its head. Hey folks, imagine this. You're standing in a room where everyone's yelling, screaming for attention, begging to be right, drowning in noise, and then you walk in and say nothing. You don't raise your voice. You don't try to prove your point. You just stand there, calm, composed, still, and suddenly everyone feels it, that chill, that weight, that power. Silence isn't the absence of words, it's the presence of power. The presence of someone who doesn't need to beg, doesn't need to explain, doesn't need to perform. It's like walking into a storm and finding someone standing in the center of it, completely still. Not because they're numb, but because they own the moment. That's you. That's what we're building today. You see, most people, they expect you to react, to get emotional, to over-explain. They want to see you panic, because panic is control. They want to see you chasing, because that means they still matter. But when you go silent, when you stop feeding their ego, that's when the tables turn. That's when they start asking the questions. Why aren't they responding? Did I lose them? Do they not care anymore? That's when your silence becomes their obsession. There's a quote that says, "Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake." And sometimes, the biggest mistake people make is thinking your silence is permission. Oh no, my friends, your silence isn't weakness. It's a statement. It's your soul saying, I don't need to be loud to be heard. I don't need to be seen to be felt. Silence is a mirror. And when you stop talking, people are forced to look into it and see who they really are. That's when regret creeps in. That's when the truth begins to echo in their own mind, louder than anything you could have said. Because silence doesn't fade. It lingers. It stays in the air, in the gaps, in the places they try to fill with noise. Some folks say, well, if I go silent, won't they just forget me? Let me tell you something. People don't forget silence. They forget the noise. They forget the arguments. They forget the paragraphs. But they never forget the moment you stopped trying, because that's when they realized they were no longer in control. And I know it's hard. I know you want to speak, to explain, to say, this is why I'm pulling back. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing. Not out of spite, but out of strength, out of self-worth, out of peace. You're not avoiding the fight, you've just outgrown it. So today, my friends, we walk into that silence not as victims, but as victors. We don't speak to be heard. We become the kind of person who doesn't need to speak. Because we know silence says everything. Write it in the comments right now. Silence says everything. Say it, show it, live it. Press the like button. Subscribe for more truth like this, and stay with me, because this journey is just getting started. Stay calm, stay focused, stay silent. Number 1, they heard nothing but felt everything. Silence doesn't need permission to speak. It echoes in every space you no longer fill. Have you ever dropped a heavy stone into a still lake? That sound, that thud, it only lasts a second, but the ripples, those go on for minutes. That's what your silence does. They may not hear from you, but they feel the ripple in their chest, in their ego, in their routines, in their late-night scrolling, because silence doesn't knock, it haunts. And the worst part? It's not loud. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't scream, look at me. No, it lingers, quiet, invisible, but powerful enough to shake a person's inner world when they least expect it. At first, they act like they don't care. Of course they do. That's part of the show. The fake smiles, the curated posts, the new connections, the forced laughter. But underneath it all, there's a growing shadow, a whisper that says, "Why haven't they called? Why did they go quiet? Why didn't they chase like they always did?" You see, your silence creates a space they can't fill, and in that space, truth begins to speak, loudly, without needing a voice. Most people expect reactions. It's how they know they still have power over you. You lash out, they win. You explain, they win. You beg. Oh, they love that. But silence flips the entire script. Suddenly, they're the one asking questions. They're the one refreshing. They're the one being haunted by your stillness. And here's the thing. This isn't about being petty. It's not a tactic. It's not some emotional trap you're setting. This is about reclaiming control, not over them, but over yourself. Because silence isn't passive, it's a declaration. It says, "I no longer explain my worth to people who never listened." It says, "I choose peace over performance." But let's be honest, this isn't easy. It's tempting to text, to check in, to see if they miss you, to throw out one last line, hoping they'll bite. Why? Because silence requires faith. Faith in yourself. Faith that your absence will say more than your presence ever did. And there's fear, isn't there? The fear that they'll just move on, that your silence will be misunderstood, that you'll be forgotten. But let me break that lie right now. People don't forget silence. They forget the noise. They forget the back and forth, the late-night explanations, the long messages that were never really read, but they never forget when someone just disappeared. Not angrily, not dramatically, just disappeared into peace. Why is that so unforgettable? Because silence doesn't give them closure. And the human ego hates loose ends. They can't file you away. They can't label you needy or obsessed or emotional if you don't react. So instead, they obsess. They become the one replaying old conversations. They become the one checking who watched their stories. They become the one wondering, what if I was wrong? That's the secret nobody tells you. When you go silent, you're not vanishing. You're vibrating on a frequency they no longer have access to. You're not running, you're rising. You're not being passive, you're being precise. And it confuses them, because silence doesn't follow the rules. It doesn't beg. It doesn't close doors with a speech. It just leaves. And that kind of energy, that scares people who rely on attention to feel important. That burns people who expected you to fall apart. They heard nothing, but they felt everything. It's like walking through a hallway you once lit with your presence, and now it's cold. Dimensois hollow. That's what they feel. They may not say it. They may never admit it. But in quiet moments, they feel the weight of your absence like a coat they can't take off. You didn't shout, you didn't rage, you just stopped showing up, and that says more than any message ever could. Folks, this is what Stoicism is all about. It's not about pretending to not care. It's about learning to care about yourself more. It's not about shutting down your emotions. It's about choosing not to hand them over to people who treat them like they're disposable. You don't have to explain why you're gone. You don't have to prove your point. You don't have to write an emotional monologue. You just have to exit the performance. And that exit, that changes everything. You see, silence isn't a wall, it's a mirror. And when you hold it up, people start seeing their reflection without the filter of your forgiveness, without the distraction of your constant reassurance, without the noise. And that's when they start to feel the burn. Because silence shows them who they were when you were the one who cared. It exposes the truth they could ignore when you were still talking, still trying, still hoping. And now they sit in the stillness you left behind. And the truth? It's getting louder every day. So if you're sitting there wondering if your silence matters, it does. It screams. It screams dignity. It screams strength. It screams evolution. Write this in the comments right now. My silence is power. Say it like you mean it. Say it so the version of you who used to explain himself feels it. Say it so the world knows you're not gone, you've just gone quiet, and the storm begins in silence. Now stay with me. Because what's coming next? Oh, it's the part where their own mind starts turning against them, and all you did was say nothing. Number 2, the questions that keep them up at night. Silence doesn't confuse the heart, it exposes it. They'll act like they're fine, like your silence meant nothing, like they didn't even notice you've gone quiet. But when the lights are out and the world finally shuts up, that's when the questions crawl in. Not yours, theirs. That silence you gave them. It turned their own thoughts into noise they can't turn off. It starts small. A pause before bed. A glance at their phone. A quiet scroll through old messages. But something feels off. Something's missing. That familiar ping. That comfort of knowing you'd eventually reach out. That assurance that no matter how cold they went, you'd melt through it with one more, "Hey, just checking in." But not this time. This time, nothing. And that nothing. It's not empty, it's loud. See, when you go silent, you don't just disappear from their screen. You start echoing in their mind. You become that question they can't answer, the moment they replay, the conversation they wish went differently, the face that shows up in their dreams, because the brain doesn't need closure, it needs peace, and they can't get that from you anymore. They thought they had time to play hot and cold, time to make you wait, time to explore other options while keeping you on standby. But time is cruel to people who think silence is weakness, because the longer you stay quiet, the more their mind fills the gaps with stories. Did they find someone else? Why did they stop trying? Did they ever really care? And the worst one, did I just lose someone who would have given me everything? People don't panic when you cry or shout or beg. That means they're still in control. But go quiet, walk away without a word. That's when their ego starts to itch. That's when the mask slips, because silence doesn't validate them. It leaves them with themselves. And most people can't stand who they are when there's no one left clapping for the show. They'll pretend to be busy, distracted, unbothered. They might post more, show off, talk louder. But if you watch closely, you'll see it. The cracks, the hesitation, the forced energy. Because deep down, they're not wondering what you're doing. They're wondering why you stopped caring, why your energy pulled back, why your name doesn't pop up anymore. That absence becomes personal, because your attention was their proof of value. And now they're left in silence. But not the peaceful kind. No, this silence presses, it tightens, it loops, because you didn't just go quiet, you went calm. And that calm, it's terrifying, because it doesn't mean you're trying to win them back. It means you've already let them go. And here's the raw truth most don't want to face. Your silence is not just rejection, it's reflection. You didn't curse them out. You didn't slam the door. You just stopped handing them the mirror. And now they're left to see themselves clearly, without your comfort softening the image. They thought they knew how this would go. They thought they could predict your next move. But silence doesn't follow a script. Silence doesn't give answers. It creates questions. And those questions, they stick, they swirl. They keep them up at night, staring at the ceiling, asking the one thing their ego hates the most. Did I make a mistake? Because you didn't just leave, you elevated. And that elevation, it's visible, it's felt. It shows in how you move, how you post, how you no longer react. They feel the shift, even if they don't admit it. And that quiet shift, it shakes them harder than any dramatic exit ever could. They wonder if you're thinking about them. They wonder if you ever cared. They wonder if you've already replaced them. They wonder and wonder and wonder. And all the while, you stay silent. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you're healing you. See, this isn't about playing hard to get. This is about being hard to disturb. This is about reclaiming your peace, your dignity, your energy. You don't go quiet out of spite. You go quiet because the noise was costing you too much. Your worth, your time, your power. And now they sit in the aftermath, left with questions they never thought they'd ask, left with silence they never thought they'd feel, left with a version of you they didn't expect to meet. The one who doesn't chase, the one who doesn't beg, the one who knows. You've become the question that won't go away, the silence that echoes louder than the noise, the calm they thought was weakness, but now realize was strength. And no matter how much they distract themselves, those thoughts, they circle back at 2 a.m., at red lights, in crowded rooms. When the world finally goes quiet, you are the sound that remains. Write it in the comments right now. I let silence speak. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted attention, but because I finally realized peace is louder than pain. Let them wonder, let them question, let them stay up at night. Your silence, it said everything, and we're just getting started. Number 3, you became a puzzle, and that's when they panicked. When you stopped explaining yourself, you didn't become distant, you became dangerous. They were so sure they had you figured out. Predictable, software always available, the emotional safety net they could fall back into whenever the world got too cold. You were the one who forgave too fast, reached out too soon, explained too much. You were the chapter they never finished reading, but bookmarked just in case they wanted to come back. But then you stopped, not out of spite, not out of pride, out of clarity, out of exhaustion, out of growth. You stopped answering the questions they never really asked. You stopped chasing validation from someone who couldn't even hold a real conversation. You stopped showing up to auditions you never signed up for. And that's when it happened. You became a puzzle, a riddle their ego couldn't solve, a mystery that kept unfolding in silence. And the more they tried to make sense of your stillness, the more it exposed how much noise they used to rely on to feel powerful. At first, they laughed it off. Oh, they're just taking space. Then the laughs turned into glances, glances into checking, checking into scrolling, and scrolling into wondering. Where did you go? Why haven't you said anything? Why do I feel like I don't know them anymore? Because now you're not broadcasting your emotions, you're not crying out for closure, you're not explaining what they already ignored, you're just existing quietly, powerfully, in a way they never expected from you. And that scares them, because people fear what they can't predict. They feel threatened when they lose access to your patterns, when they don't know what you're thinking, when you stop telling them how you feel, when you become unreadable. That unreadability, that's when the panic sets in. Your silence broke the algorithm they were using to control you. They were running a script. Pull away, get attention, act cold, you chase, throw breadcrumbs, you follow. But suddenly the program glitches. The inputs don't work anymore. You're not chasing, you're not checking in, you're not reacting, you're unavailable. And let's be real, people don't miss the real you at first. They miss the version they could manipulate. They miss the attention, the reassurance, the power. But when all that goes quiet, when the source dries up, that's when they realize they were never dealing with a fool. They were dealing with someone who just hadn't snapped out of it yet. Well, now you've snapped out of it. And you've stepped into something colder, clearer, calmer. You've become someone who doesn't react to confusion, they observe it. Who doesn't chase questions, they create them. Who doesn't need to be understood to know their worth. That kind of energy, it's magnetic, but not the kind they're used to. This isn't you begging to be seen. This is you becoming someone they don't have the emotional tools to read anymore. It's like walking into a familiar room that suddenly feels foreign. Like the furniture's still there, but the warmth is gone. The energy's different. The walls don't echo the way they used to. That's what they feel when they come back around and you're no longer accessible. And let's talk about that ego, that loud, prideful, always in control ego. It hates not knowing, it feeds on predictability, it relies on your past responses to feel strong. But now it's starving, because you're no longer reacting on cue, you're not emotionally available on demand. You've shut the curtain, dimmed the lights, and walked off stage. You're not the backup plan, you're not the side quest, you're not the comfort blanket, you're the storm they thought they could outwalk, and now they're standing in the eye of it, realizing you changed the game without saying a word. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud: they respect it. Deep down, behind the fake indifference, they respect your distance. They feel your detachment. They envy your calm, because they know it takes strength to become what they couldn't control. You didn't just disappear, you disrupted. You didn't just walk away, you restructured. You didn't play harder to get, you became harder to forget. They're left pacing circles in their own mind, trying to find the version of you that used to be easy to figure out. But that version, gone. Replaced by someone they never took the time to understand because they were too busy performing for their own ego. Now the roles are reversed. You are the mystery. You are the question. You are the silence that doesn't apologize. And every second you stay quiet, it makes the noise in their head just a little louder. Write this in the comments right now. I am not a pattern. Say it like you're breaking the loop. Say it like you mean it. Say it because you've finally realized when you become a puzzle they can't solve, you become a truth they can't ignore. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, there's no closure, just the chaos that comes when silence leaves them alone with their guilt. Number 4, no closure, no control. When you give them no ending, their mind writes 1,000 of them, and none bring peace. Closure, that's what they want. That's what they think they're entitled to. A final word, a clean goodbye, a conversation that wraps everything up in a neat little bow so they can sleep peacefully at night. But here's the truth, my friends. Closure isn't about healing. It's about control. It's about keeping the power in their hands one last time. And when you don't give them that, when you go silent, walk away, and leave the door swinging in the wind, that's when their ego starts to spiral. They weren't expecting that. They expected a fight, a long message, a dramatic scene, maybe even a final plea. That's how it usually goes, right? Pull away and you'll come chasing. Ignore them and you'll try harder. Hurt them and you'll ask why. But this time, nothing. Not a call, not a text, not a goodbye. And that nothing, it burns more than anything you could have said. Because closure is a lie dressed up as kindness. It's a performance people demand when they don't want to sit with the consequences of their actions. They say they want clarity, but what they really want is comfort. They want you to make them feel okay about walking away from something they never valued correctly. They want to hear you say, "It's not your fault." They want to hear, "I understand." They want permission to let go without feeling guilty. But you didn't give them that, and that's why the silence stings. You see, when you give someone closure, you're handing them the final word. You're giving them a summary of your pain, neatly packaged, so they can toss it aside with a little sigh and a shrug. But when you go silent, you leave the story open-ended, unfinished. And that kind of story doesn't fade, it festers, because now they have to fill in the blanks. And the human brain, oh, it hates unanswered questions. It obsesses, it rewinds, it analyzes every word, every look, every delay, every deleted message. They start to imagine what you might have said, what you might be feeling, who you might be with. And the worst part, they don't get to know. And when you take away their ability to know, you take away their power. That's when it flips. That's when your silence becomes their tormentor. Every day they don't hear from you becomes a sentence in the book they can't stop reading. Every time they check your profile and see you smiling, glowing, evolving without them, that becomes another reminder. You didn't just leave the conversation, you ended the entire show. And that kind of exit, that haunts them. Because you didn't rage, you didn't beg, you didn't break down, you just left, not with words, but with clarity, not to get even, but to get free. And that freedom, it screams. They thought they were in charge, that they could breadcrumb you back with just the right message, that they could show up whenever they were bored and find you waiting. But now they're left staring at an empty inbox, wondering where the hell you went and why it hurts so much more than they expected. The truth is, people expect forgiveness. They expect closure. They expect understanding. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the silence say, I no longer owe you anything. No explanation, no closure, no control. And that absence, it drives them mad because it doesn't make sense, because it doesn't follow the script, because you were supposed to be the one who cared more. But now you've rewritten the ending they never saw coming. And sure, they'll pretend they're fine. They'll post like nothing happened, laugh a little louder, live a little flashier. But it's not real. It's performance, because inside, they're running laps around a question that has no answer. Why didn't they say goodbye? And the answer is simple, my friends. You didn't need to. You outgrew the conversation. You outgrew the performance. You outgrew the version of you that needed to explain your worth to people who only ever listened to respond, not to understand. You didn't go quiet to confuse them. You went quiet because peace doesn't come with punctuation marks. Sometimes peace is walking away without slamming the door. Sometimes peace is saying nothing at all. And sometimes peace is leaving them in the silence they created, while you go build a life that no longer includes the chaos they brought. So if you're feeling the urge to explain yourself, to reach out one more time, to write that final message, don't. Don't hand them a script they didn't earn. Don't give them control over a story they barely showed up for. Instead, give them what they truly deserve: silence. Because the most powerful thing you'll ever do is say nothing and mean it. Write it in the comments, no closure, just clarity. Say it with your chest. Show the world you don't need a final scene to close the chapter. Let them wonder, let them stew, let them face the silence. You didn't owe them closure, you owed yourself freedom. And now you've got it. Number 5, when your calm becomes their chaos. They expected an argument. You gave them peace, and it tore them apart. People know how to fight. They know how to deal with anger, with drama, with noise. They've rehearsed those scenes in their heads 1,000 times. Raise your voice, throw your pride on the table, make a scene, slam a few doors. That they're prepared for. What they're not prepared for is silence. Calm. That unnerving stillness that wraps around them like a fog, making them question everything they thought they understood about you. See, when you're calm, truly calm, not faking it, not suppressing rage, but radiating a peace that cannot be shaken, that's when their world begins to tilt. Because it means you're no longer playing the game, no longer triggered, no longer invested in trying to prove a damn thing. And that calm, that's not weakness, that's control, that's command. That's you becoming something they can't manipulate anymore. They expected you to explode, to beg, to ask for explanations, to scroll through old messages and come crawling back with one last emotional essay. But instead, you gave them nothing. You took all that energy you used to pour into them and redirected it back into yourself. You didn't curse them out. You didn't chase them down. You simply exited the noise, and that silence became louder than any fight ever could. And that, my friends, is when their chaos begins. Because people who depend on drama to feel significant crumble in the face of peace. They don't know how to sit in stillness. Stillness is where their doubts live. It's where the mirror is held up, where there's no one left to blame but themselves, When you were loud, you were predictable. When you were hurt, they still had leverage. But now you're calm, detached, emotionally sovereign, and that's terrifying to someone who used to thrive off your emotional reaction. Let me ask you something. Why do you think they kept poking? Why do you think they kept testing you, pulling back, acting cold, playing games? Because they needed to feel in control. And your reaction, your fire, gave them that. Every time you explained, every time you argued, every time you responded, they won. Not because they were right, but because they kept you hooked. But the moment you refused to bite, the moment you chose silence over shouting, you broke the pattern. You became the calm in a storm they thought they controlled, and now they're left spinning, spiraling, second-guessing everything, because calm means you've outgrown the chaos. Calm means you don't need closure or revenge or their validation. Calm means you're not just done with them, you're done with the version of yourself that let them pull your strings. And that realization, that eats them alive. They check their phone and your name isn't there. They post a story and you don't watch. They try to bait you with silence and you don't flinch. They wait for the reaction that used to come, and all they get is stillness. And in that stillness, something begins to unravel. Not you, them. Because your calm is confusing. It's unsettling. It makes them question their importance in your life. Did they even care? Were they pretending? How are they okay without me? And the truth is, you're not pretending. You're just done explaining yourself to people who never took the time to understand you. Let them feel that shift. Let them sit in the space your absence created. Because the calm you now carry, that's not just peace, it's power. The power to walk away without chaos. The power to rise without noise. The power to let them destroy themselves with questions you no longer feel obligated to answer. They say silence is golden. But I'd argue calm is diamond, unbreakable, sharp, and impossible to ignore. You don't need to scream to be felt. You don't need to argue to be right. And you don't need to chase to prove your worth. Your calm is the message. And it's the one thing they can't screenshot, can't manipulate, and can't prepare for. You didn't give them the satisfaction of a meltdown. You gave them something worse. You gave them a version of you they can no longer affect, a version of you that doesn't yell, doesn't text paragraphs, doesn't try to prove anything, a version of you that just is. And now, every time they reach out and hear nothing, every time they try to get under your skin and see no reaction, every time they remember how easily you used to be moved, and how still you are now, they feel the storm they created echoing inside them. Write this in the comments right now. My calm is my command. Say it to remind yourself that you don't need to react to chaos to prove you've healed. Say it to remind them, in case they're watching, that peace isn't passive, it's earned. Let them drown in the waves they created. You walk on still water, and the next step, that silence becomes a mirror, and that's when they start to crack. Number 6, they play cool, but their ego's cracking. They'll act like they don't care, but silence doesn't care about their act. You've seen it before, the sudden glow-up, the extra-filtered stories, the fake laughs posted for strangers, that exaggerated, I'm living my best life energy. They want to look unbothered. They want you to believe your silence didn't touch them, that you were just a small page in their story. But if you look a little closer, behind the performance, behind the curated chaos, you'll see it. The cracks, the unraveling, the ego that's desperately trying to hold itself together. Because here's what they never expected: consistency in your silence. They thought it was temporary, a tactic, a bluff. They figured you'd be back. A week, maybe 2, and you'd break. Send that text. Watch their story. React to their bait. That's how it always went before. That's how most people respond to rejection. With panic, with effort, with one last plea to be seen. But not you. You went quiet and stayed quiet. You didn't just go cold for a day. You vanished into calm. You didn't delete your emotions. You redirected them into your peace, your mission, your life. And the more they scrolled, the more they realized you weren't performing, you were done. And that's when the mask begins to slip. Because the ego, it can only wear the "I'm fine" costume for so long. Eventually, the silence you left behind starts to echo louder than their own voice. And no matter how many pictures they post, no matter how many people they flirt with, no matter how many stories they upload with fake captions about growth and moving on, it doesn't stop the truth from crawling in late at night. You were the one who actually meant it. And now you're gone. They told themselves the story they needed to hear. They were too clingy. They were too emotional. I had to pull away to protect myself. But now, that story's falling apart. Because if you were all those things, why does your absence feel heavier than your presence ever did? The truth, they didn't expect your strength. They expected your softness. They expected you to chase. And now, every day you don't. That bruises the ego. It stings their pride. It creates questions they can't answer. Were they faking it? Did they ever care? Why did they let go so easily? Did I mess up something real? Questions they'll never say out loud, of course. No, on the outside, they'll double down. They'll keep posting, keep pretending, keep performing. But inside, they're watching you. Through mutual friends, through fake accounts, through every digital crack they swore they'd never crawl through. They're checking because curiosity doesn't go away when someone stops talking. It multiplies. And the irony, you didn't do anything. You didn't post revenge photos. You didn't write cryptic captions. You didn't try to make them jealous. You just moved on, quietly, completely, without fanfare. And that is what cracks them open, because they realize this wasn't an act. You didn't go silent to get a reaction. You went silent because you found peace in letting go. That's when the ego begins to panic, because the ego depends on control, on reaction, on confirmation, and you took all of that away, not by fighting, but by refusing to engage at all. See, people don't expect to be forgotten, not when they thought they were the one with the upper hand. And now they feel what you once felt. The doubt, the confusion, the quiet ache of being ignored by someone who used to care. But unlike you, they're not ready for it. You see, your silence wasn't just distance, it was discipline. It was the final act of self-respect. You didn't disappear because you were weak. You disappeared because you were done. Done chasing mixed signals, done decoding cold energy, done making excuses for someone who knew what they were doing. You didn't burn bridges. You just stopped crossing them. And now they're standing on the other side, watching the gap get wider, wondering why the person they thought they could always return to is suddenly unreachable. And let me tell you something, they feel it. They feel your stillness more than they ever felt your effort. Because effort was expected. But this new version of you, this calm, detached, focused version, it's not just surprising, it's unforgettable. Write this in the comments right now. I let go and I didn't look back. Say it because it's real. Say it because their ego is still hoping you didn't mean it. Say it because your silence isn't a chapter, it's the whole book they never finished reading. Stay with me. Because next, we talk about how your consistency, your peace, is not just making them question you, it's making them question themselves. Number 7. You were the anchor, now they drift. They didn't realize you were the calm in the storm until they lost you and the storm never left. They didn't want you steady, they wanted you available. They didn't want consistency, they wanted access. But now that you're gone, really gone, not with a speech, not with a warning, just gone, something strange is happening. They're drifting, and they don't even know why. See, you weren't just another person in their life. You were the anchor, the grounding force, the one who stayed when things got messy, the one who gave without keeping score, the one who showed up with heart, with patience, with presence. You were the emotional constant they leaned on more than they ever admitted. But back then, they couldn't see it. Why? Because consistency doesn't feel special until it's gone. Now they're out there, floating through conversations that don't hit the same, smiling at people who don't really see them, surrounded by noise, but feeling more disconnected than ever. They don't feel grounded. They feel scattered. Why? Because the person who used to hold space for their chaos, you, isn't holding it anymore. You stopped catching the late-night texts. You stopped decoding their silence. You stopped making it your job to hold together what they kept pulling apart. And now that you've withdrawn your energy, your effort, your loyalty, your attention, they feel something they can't name. It's not guilt, not yet. It's drift. It's a quiet instability, the emotional dizziness of losing the one person who never needed an audience to care. And you know what's wild? They're still trying to convince themselves that they're fine, still posting, still joking, still performing. But internally, the absence is louder than anything. Because when someone's used to being tethered to something solid, freedom starts to feel like free fall. You were the calm in the center of their chaos, the one who answered when no one else did, the one who saw through the performance and still stayed, and they thought that was ordinary. They mistook your peace for passivity. They mistook your patience for weakness. They thought you'd always be there, until you weren't. And that shift, that's when the drifting begins. The slow unraveling, the emotional instability that creeps in when you realize the person you thought you'd always have waiting isn't waiting anymore. They look for you in new people now, in rushed conversations, in empty validation, but it's never the same, because you weren't just someone to talk to. You were someone who listened. You weren't just company. You were connection, and that kind of presence. It doesn't get replaced. It gets missed. But here's the part that hits the hardest. They're not just missing you. They're missing who they were when they were around you. The version of themselves that felt safe, understood, seen. You brought that out of them, not with force, but with peace, not with pressure, but with presence. And now they feel the shift. That version of them is harder to find, because you're no longer reflecting it back to them. You're not holding the mirror anymore. You're not holding them anymore. They drift, not because you pushed them away, but because you stopped holding the space that kept them centered. You stopped being their reminder, their reset, their quiet place to land. And in that void, everything feels a little less certain. And sure, they might not say it. Their pride might never let them admit it. But drifting has a cost. It doesn't break you all at once. It pulls you apart, piece by piece. And every now and then, they remember the one who used to bring them back to stillness. And that memory, that's what keeps them restless. But you're not drifting. You're rising. You're grounded in something deeper now. Yourself, your values, your future. You're not someone waiting for the wind to bring them back. You're someone who realized that carrying people who don't want to be held is how you drown. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left to heal you. You didn't pull away to punish. You pulled away to protect. And that protection of your peace, your time, your energy is what finally anchored you. They thought you were the dependent one. They thought they were the strong one. But now that you've gone quiet, now that you've reclaimed your stillness, they're the ones adrift. They're the ones lost in the sea of distractions while you've built your own land beneath your feet. Write this in the comments right now. I was the anchor. Now I'm the lighthouse. Say it because it's true. Say it because they needed your stability but never valued it. Say it because while they're still floating, you've found home in your own self.